They called her the Duchess not because of bloodlines or titles, but because she carried herself like she'd been born to command empires. Her name was Evangeline St. Clair, daughter of a fallen English nobleman who had come west chasing gold and died chasing ghosts. In the brutal sun-baked land of New Mexico territory, Evangeline had learned that grace alone wouldn't keep wolves or men at bay. Her father's ranch, St. Clair Hold, sat on the edge of nowhere, a vast sweep of scrubland and mesquite fenced only by dust and determination. When he died, the hands had expected her to sell. But she stayed. She rode the same black stallion her father had trained, handled a rifle better than most of the cowboys, and wore a revolver on her hip, though she preferred her bow. It was quieter, more personal. Every inch of her was contradiction, silk and steel, gentility and grit. She could sit a horse like a Comanche, and then pour afternoon tea from a china set shipped from London. To the ranchers and traders who passed through Santa Fe, she was a curiosity. To the men who worked for her, she was both boss and mystery. To the Apache who watched her from the ridges, she was a stranger trespassing on land their ancestors had bled for. Rumors of Apache raids had reached her long before she saw any sign of them. A rancher's herd was found scattered, horses taken, smoke curling in the distance where no settler dared to go. But the Duchess refused to be frightened. "Fear's a disease," she'd told her foreman, old Micah Boone, "and I'm not taking sick from it." That evening, the desert air carried the first breath of winter. The sun was a red coin sinking behind the hills, and the land glowed as if made of fire. Evangeline rode out alone, her bow across her saddle, the hem of her riding skirt brushing the dust. The land was silent except for the slow beat of her horse's hooves. From the ridge above the river she could see far, shifting shadows, dry brush, a hawk circling. Then she saw him, a figure moving below, half hidden among the rocks. Not a ranch hand, not a trapper. An Apache. Her heartbeat quickened. He moved like a spirit, bare-chested beneath a woven vest, long black hair braided and tied with leather, a knife at his belt. The setting sun caught on silver beads that flashed like stars at his throat. He carried a spear, but it was lowered, not raised. Evangeline didn't think. She drew her bow, her gloved fingers finding the string like a habit born of fear. She'd been taught that hesitation got you killed. The arrow sang through the wind. For a heartbeat, it seemed the desert itself paused. The Apache turned just as the arrow reached him. His hand shot out, and impossibly he caught it. The shaft quivered in his palm. His head lifted slowly, and his eyes met hers across the distance. Amber eyes, alive with fury, surprise, and something else she couldn't name. The Duchess's breath caught in her throat. He didn't shout or reach for his weapon. He simply looked at her as if memorizing her face. Then he broke the arrow in half, the dry snap echoing in the hollow canyon. That small sound carried more warning than any war cry. Evangeline's horse stamped and snorted, sensing the danger. She turned it sharply, but when she looked again, the warrior was gone, vanished like smoke into the rocks. The silence that followed was heavy, pressing on her chest. For the first time in years, the Duchess felt something she'd long sworn off: fear. As the night came down over the plains, she couldn't shake the image of those eyes burning gold against the dying light. She told herself it was only a glimpse of an enemy. But deep down, something older than reason whispered otherwise. The desert had taken notice of her, and so had the man who caught her arrow. The following day dawned silent, the air heavy with dust and dread. Evangeline St. Clair, the Duchess, stood on the porch of her ranch house, staring out over the plains where the wind moved the grass like waves. She had not slept. The image of the Apache catching her arrow haunted her dreams. She could still hear the snap of the shaft breaking in his hand, still see the defiance in his amber eyes. Micah Boone, her foreman, noticed her pallor. "You're pale, Miss St. Clair," he said, wiping his brow with a dirty bandana. "You see something out there yesterday?" She hesitated. To admit it would be to give shape to the unease twisting in her chest. "Only the wind," she lied. "But I want the herd brought in closer today, and keep the riders within sight of the ridge." Boone nodded, but his eyes narrowed. "You sure there ain't something else, Duchess? The Apache been restless since that army patrol came through." Evangeline turned away. "Restless or not, they'll think twice before crossing my fence line." But as she walked back inside, her fingers brushed the bow hanging on the wall. The smooth curve of it, the faint scent of oil and dust. It reminded her how close she'd come to something she couldn't name. By late afternoon, she was riding again, unable to sit still. The horizon shimmered beneath the sun's white blaze and the air buzzed with locusts. She followed the same ridge as before, bow across her saddle, eyes scanning every dip and shadow. She wanted to prove to herself that what she'd seen was only a trick of the light, but the desert had a way of giving back what it took. She saw him again. He stood on a distant slope, half hidden behind a mesquite tree, watching her. He made no move toward her, but neither did he hide. His face was painted with streaks of ash and ochre. His long hair braided tight, and the same broken arrow hung from a leather cord around his neck. Evangeline's heart stuttered. He had kept it as if it meant something. Her instinct screamed to ride back to the ranch. Instead, she dismounted. Her boots sank into the sand as she lifted her bow once more, defiance rising like heat through her body. The warrior didn't move. The wind carried the faintest whisper of his voice across the distance. She couldn't make out the words, but she felt their weight. Then he raised his hand, not in challenge, but in warning. And suddenly the air changed. From the ravine behind her, she heard the soft scrape of movement. More footsteps, light and quick. Panic flared in her chest. She spun, arrow drawn, and saw the flash of figures, 2, maybe 3, moving between the rocks. Before she could aim, a low whistle cut through the air. The other warriors stopped where they were. The man with the amber eyes had given the signal. He descended the slope toward her, unarmed, his movements calm and deliberate. Evangeline froze, torn between running and standing her ground. He stopped a few paces away, his shadow falling over her boots. "You shoot again," he said, his voice low but steady. "And this time I will catch you." Not the arrow. His English was accented but clear. She tried to keep her voice even. "You're trespassing on my land." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Your land?" He looked around at the endless plains, the cliffs painted red by the setting sun. "The wind does not belong to you. The earth does not belong to you. You walk on borrowed soil." Evangeline swallowed hard. "Then you should leave before you find yourself buried in it." The man's gaze softened, not with fear, but something close to amusement. "You are brave," he murmured. "And foolish." He turned then, gesturing for his men to retreat. They melted into the rocks like spirits fading with dusk. But before he disappeared, he looked back at her once more. "I am Cale," he said. "Remember that name when you dream tonight." And then he was gone. The desert fell silent again, leaving her alone with the dying sun and the echo of his voice in her heart. Evangeline mounted her horse with trembling hands. She told herself it was only anger that made her chest tighten, that it was fury, nothing more, that burned in her veins. But as the moon rose over the canyon, she could still see those amber eyes watching her from the shadows, and deep inside she knew the truth. The wind had carried something far more dangerous than war into her life. It had carried him. The next morning, the sun rose blood-red over the plains. Evangeline St. Clair had not slept again. Cale's name, the sound of it like a drumbeat, echoed in her mind long after he had vanished into the rocks. She told herself it was fury that kept her awake. Fury that an Apache dared speak to her like an equal. Fury that she, the Duchess, had trembled under his gaze. But when she looked out across the sand, she couldn't shake the feeling that the desert was watching her back. Micah Boone had warned her not to ride out alone again. "Apache don't forget a thing, Duchess," he'd said. "You draw blood, they'll come collect." Still she rode. She told herself it was duty, to inspect the outer fences, to count the cattle grazing near the river. But truth whispered otherwise. Her bow was slung across her back. Her eyes kept drifting to the horizon, searching for the ghost who had caught her arrow. By noon, the sun burned white in a sky without mercy. Her canteen was nearly empty when her mare pricked its ears and stopped. The air shifted, a silence so sharp it rang in her ears. Then came the softest sound, a footfall, a breath. Before she could turn, a shadow fell over her. Kyle. He was close enough for her to smell the smoke and wild sage clinging to his skin. He moved like wind over sand, no noise, no hesitation. In one motion he caught her wrist, disarmed her, and pulled her from the saddle. She hit the ground hard, the wind rushing from her lungs. Her bow clattered beside her, useless. She looked up, and there he stood, towering above her, eyes the color of fire-lit honey. "You followed me," she said. forcing steel into her voice. "You aimed for my heart," he replied, kneeling beside her. "Now I follow yours." His words made her pulse leap. She tried to rise, but he caught her by the arm, not rough, but firm. "Let me go," she demanded. Cale tilted his head, studying her as though she were a rare and dangerous creature. "If I let you go, the soldiers will come again. You will lead them here." "I would do no such thing," she spat. He shook his head slowly. "You do not understand. Your people bring death wherever they go. The land remembers their boots." Evangeline glared up at him, her hair tangled in the wind. "And what of your kind? You raid, you steal, you burn." He met her anger without flinching. "We take what was taken from us." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the distant cry of a hawk. Cale reached into a leather pouch at his waist and drew out something small, her broken arrow. He held it between them. "You cannot undo this," he said. "Now our paths are tied." Before she could answer, he bound her wrists with a strip of soft rawhide. The gesture was careful, almost reverent, as though he feared hurting her. When he finished, he looked at her again, not as an enemy, but as a question he could not yet answer. Evangeline struggled, but the knot held. "You think tying me makes me yours?" she hissed. Cale's lips curved slightly. "The moon will decide that." He pulled her to her feet and led her toward his horse, a painted stallion with eyes like midnight. He lifted her into the saddle, mounted behind her, and pressed his arm around her waist to keep her steady. His touch was warm, steady, unbearably human. They rode south into the desert, the sun sinking behind them, the horizon bleeding gold and crimson. With every mile, the wind seemed to change, carrying the scent of smoke, rain, and something older than either of them. Evangeline tried not to feel the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her back, but it was there, solid, real, unyielding. As twilight deepened, she realized she was far from home. The world she knew, her ranch, her rules, her safety had vanished behind the hills. And somewhere deep inside, she understood that she wasn't just captured by a man, she was being claimed by the desert itself. The sun was dying on the horizon, a red coin sinking into sand and smoke. Evangeline sat stiff in the saddle, her wrists bound, her back pressed against the chest of the man who had taken her. The horse moved like a wave beneath them, smooth and silent, carrying them deeper into the land she had only ever known as enemy country. Kyle said nothing as they rode. His arm, steady and unyielding around her waist, kept her from falling as exhaustion and heat gnawed at her strength. The desert stretched endless ahead, ridges of rock, dry riverbeds, sagebrush silvered by moonlight. "Where are you taking me?" she asked finally, her voice low but steady. "To the south," he answered. "To my people." "You'll regret this," she warned. "The army will come. They'll hang you for what you've done." Kyle didn't reply. The faintest smile crossed his lips, unseen by her. "They would have to catch me first." They rode until the last light faded and stars began to pierce the dark. When he stopped at last, Evangeline swayed in the saddle, dizzy from thirst. Cale dismounted first, then reached up to lift her down. She tried to resist, but her legs gave way the instant her boots hit the ground. He caught her easily before she fell. "Easy," he murmured. "You are no use to me dead." "I'm no use to you alive either," she snapped, glaring up at him. Kyle looked at her, his expression unreadable in the firelight as he kindled a small blaze between the rocks. "You're wrong," he said. "You shot at me. Now the spirits have bound your fate to mine. You will see it through." She scoffed and turned her face away, but the flicker of flames caught the glint of his amber eyes. Warm, watchful, and too calm for a captor. He removed the rawhide from her wrists, and the moment her hands were free, she snatched for the knife at his belt. He caught her wrist before she even felt the hilt. His strength was effortless, terrifying, yet he didn't strike her. He simply looked at her hand, trembling in his grasp. "If you mean to kill me," he said quietly, "do not hesitate." Evangeline froze. His tone wasn't a challenge, it was an invitation. She could feel the heartbeat beneath his skin, the rise and fall of his chest. For one dizzying second, she imagined pressing the blade against his throat, and then she dropped it. Cale released her at once, as though her surrender was answer enough. "You could have killed me," she said, her voice shaking. "And you could have killed me first," he replied, "but you missed." That faint smile again, infuriating, dangerous. They ate in silence, dried meat, cool water from a canteen he offered her first. Evangeline hated that her hands trembled when she took it. She hated even more the strange gentleness in his gestures, the way he kept his distance but never his gaze. "Why didn't you kill me that first day?" she asked finally, staring into the fire. Cale's voice was low, almost thoughtful. "Because the arrow stopped in the air. No one does that. Not unless the spirits wish it so. Perhaps they had other plans for you." She turned toward him sharply. "And what plans would that be?" Cale met her eyes, the corner of his mouth curving slightly. "That is what I must learn." A shiver passed through her, not from the cold, but from the quiet certainty in his tone. He rose and walked a few paces away, keeping watch over the dark ridges where coyotes howled in the distance. Evangeline watched his silhouette, strong, solitary, haloed by firelight. Something inside her stirred, something she didn't want to name. When he returned, he tossed her a blanket. "Sleep," he said simply. "Tomorrow we ride farther." She wrapped it around herself, staring at him through the flickering flames. "You're my captor," she whispered. Kyle's gaze held hers. "No," he said softly. "The desert is." And as the night deepened and the moon climbed high, Evangeline realized he might be right. For the first time in her life, she was not in control, and for reasons she couldn't explain, she no longer wanted to be. The sun rose pale and cold over the rugged canyons, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch like fingers across the desert. Evangeline St. Clair, still weary from the long ride, tightened the folds of her dress and looked around. The land before her was wild and untamed, far from the fences and homesteads she knew. Here the earth belonged to the wind and the Apache who had always roamed it. Cale rode beside her, silent, alert. The desert had grown stranger with every mile, the colors shifting under the morning sun, the air thick with dust and secrets. Evangeline's chest tightened. She was about to enter the heart of a world she had only imagined in fearful whispers. Ahead, nestled between cliffs, lay the Apache village. Smoke rose from the teepees in gentle spirals, blending with the morning mist. Children ran barefoot across the sand, their laughter carrying over the dry wind. Women tended to fires, cooking and weaving with practiced hands. Men sharpened weapons, their eyes wary, glancing at the ridge where she and Cale approached. Evangeline's pulse quickened. This was no longer a ride into the desert. This was captivity. As they entered, Cale raised a hand. The other warriors, 4 of them, young and tense, halted, their spears steady. Cale's voice, calm but commanding, cut through the tense silence. "She comes under my protection," he said in the Apache tongue. The warriors exchanged glances but did not move. Cale dismounted first, helping Evangeline to the ground. She stumbled slightly, her pride bristling as she straightened. A figure emerged from the largest teepee, a tall man with lines carved into his face by sun and wind. Chief Tenay, Cale's father, approached, eyes sharp and calculating. His gaze swept over Evangeline like a hawk inspecting prey. "Why bring her here?" Tenay asked, his voice deep and steady. "She shot at me," Cale replied, standing tall beside her, "and the spirits chose her life to be bound to mine." The Duchess's mouth opened but no words came. She had no English that could explain herself, no argument strong enough to sway these people. And yet, the chief's eyes softened only slightly as he regarded her, as if weighing the truth of Cale's words. Tenay circled her slowly. "She is white. She belongs to the other side." "And yet she lives," Kyle said, his voice firm. "The arrow did not find her heart. She is under my care. If harm comes to her, I will answer." A murmur ran through the gathered crowd. The women looked at her curiously, some with suspicion, others with quiet interest. Children peeked from behind skirts and hands, their dark eyes wide and unblinking. Evangeline realized she was being measured, every step, every gesture, every breath catalogued by the village. For the first time she felt small, a stranger stripped of all advantage, standing naked before a world she did not know how to navigate. Cale stepped closer to her, lowering his voice. "Fear them not. You are safe while I am near. But remember, pride alone will not protect you here." She swallowed hard. The fire of defiance inside her still burned, but the weight of the desert and its people pressed down like an invisible hand. She wanted to hate them, to rage against her situation. Yet even as she resisted, a strange curiosity began to bloom. What kind of life could exist here beyond the fences, beyond the fear? The chief studied her a moment longer, then nodded. "She will stay in the village, but she will learn our ways. We will test her courage and her heart. Evangeline's eyes flared. "I will not bow to anyone," she cried. Kyle's hand brushed hers almost imperceptibly. "You will not bow," he whispered. "You will stand. That is different." The chief gave a short nod and turned, walking back into the heart of the village. Kale's eyes held hers for a moment, a silent promise passing between them, a tether neither the wind nor war could break. And as the sun climbed higher, the Duchess realized she was no longer merely a visitor in this desert. She had stepped into a shadowed world, and whether she liked it or not, it was beginning to claim her. The Apache village had settled into the rhythm of the day, but Evangeline St. Clair could not. She paced beneath the hot sun, her hands clasped behind her back, her eyes flicking from the children playing near the fire pits to the warriors practicing with spears and bows. Each movement, each glance reminded her that she was an outsider, a white woman in a world that had always been painted as hostile in her people's stories. Kale walked beside her silently, the only sound between them the crunch of sand beneath their boots. His presence was constant, unyielding, a tether she could neither cut nor ignore. "You walk as if you own the desert," Kale said quietly, breaking the silence. "I am not afraid of it," Evangeline replied, though her voice betrayed a trace of tension. She didn't look at him, refusing to give him any foothold over her pride. Kale's amber eyes held hers for a moment, calm but sharp. "You should be. This land is not yours. You are a guest, even if the spirits have woven our paths together." Evangeline paused, letting the words settle like embers against dry brush. She wanted to snap back, to assert the dominance she had carried all her life, but something in Kale's unwavering gaze made her hesitate. Pride had always been her armor, but here it felt fragile, almost dangerous. That evening she was brought before Chief Tenay, seated beneath the largest fire circle in the village. The chief's eyes, as old and deep as the canyons, studied her like a hawk inspecting a new hatchling. "You have pride," Tenay said, his voice carrying across the circle. "But pride can blind you to truth. Courage does not always roar. Sometimes it listens." Evangeline's hands clenched in her lap. She wanted to argue, to demand respect, but the weight of the chief's gaze silenced her. Kale stood behind her, a quiet sentinel, his expression unreadable. Later, as the moon rose over the village, she found herself alone with Kale near the edge of the firelight. The children had gone to their mothers and the warriors were gathered in hushed conversation. "You fear them," Kale said, his voice low, almost teasing. "I fear nothing," she replied, though her voice wavered. He smiled faintly, the movement softening the harshness of his features. "You fear what you cannot control." Evangeline turned to face him fully, her eyes flashing. "And what is it you cannot control, Kale?" He studied her for a long moment, the firelight dancing across his strong jaw and the gleam of his amber eyes. "Sometimes the heart," he admitted quietly. Her breath caught. She had not expected honesty, not from him, not from anyone. The desert had hardened him, shaped him into a man who could survive anything, and yet in that quiet moment, she glimpsed the fire that burned beneath his calm exterior. "You speak as if you know me," she said, her voice softer now, almost wary. "I know enough," he replied. "You are fierce. You will not bend easily. That is why the spirits chose you." Her heart raced, defiance and fascination intertwining in a knot she could not untangle. She wanted to turn away, to retreat behind the armor of her pride. But Kale stepped closer, closing the distance between them without touching. "You will learn," he whispered. "And in time you may understand that fire and pride are not weaknesses. They are proof of life." The wind carried his words through the village, mingling with the scent of sage and smoke. Evangeline felt the truth of them deep in her chest, a stirring she could neither deny nor name. Pride had always defined her, but now she realized that fire, like the desert itself, could burn and warm at the same time. As she watched Kale walk back to the circle of warriors, the moon climbing higher in the sky, Evangeline understood one thing clearly. She was no longer a duchess commanding respect from afar. She was a woman caught between two worlds, and for the first time, she wondered if she wanted to stay caught at all. The desert had tested her, and it had begun to teach her. The night came swiftly, draping the village in a blanket of silver and shadow. The moon rose full over the canyon, its light washing the desert in pale fire. Evangeline St. Clair, weary yet alert, found herself drawn to the quiet of the riverbed outside the teepee. The day's lessons of patience, pride, and survival weighed heavy on her, but the night carried a softer promise, one she could neither name nor resist. Cale was there, waiting, as if he had always belonged to this place and to her gaze at the same time. He moved with the silent grace of the desert wind, his shadow stretching long across the sand, blending with hers. "You walk as if the moon is yours," Cale said softly, a teasing lilt in his voice that belied the strength behind his calm demeanor. Evangeline stiffened, refusing to look away. "Perhaps it is," she said, though her voice carried uncertainty she tried to hide. Cale knelt beside her, untying the strip of rawhide that had bound her hands during their first ride. His fingers brushed her skin lightly, deliberately slow. When her wrists were free, she flexed them, feeling the strength return to her hands, but also feeling the warmth he had left there. "You are free to leave," he said, his amber eyes fixed on hers. "The desert would allow it." Evangeline laughed softly, a sound sharp with defiance. "And yet you did not let me go the first time, did you?" Cale smiled just slightly, the corner of his mouth catching the silver light. "No, because the spirits had other plans for you, and now, perhaps they have plans for both of us." Her pulse quickened. The desert stretched endlessly around them, but in that moment the space between them shrank to a heartbeat. She could feel his presence, steady and magnetic, pressing against the walls of the pride she had built all her life. He extended a hand, not commanding, not pleading, just offering. "Walk with me," he said. Evangeline hesitated. She had been trained to stand her ground, to fight, to resist, but something in Cale's voice, in the quiet power of his presence, drew her forward. She stepped beside him, and together they moved along the riverbed, the moonlight guiding them like a silver thread. They spoke little, yet every word unspoken carried weight. The wind whispered secrets among the rocks, and the river hummed beneath the surface, carrying their shared silence into the night. Evangeline felt herself soften, her defenses trembling like the fragile reeds along the riverbank. At the edge of a small rise, Cale stopped. He turned to her, his expression unreadable but intense. "The world you knew, the one with fences and titles, will not touch us here," he murmured. "Only the desert and the moon, and perhaps only us." Her chest tightened and she found herself leaning into the moment, into him. She had been taught to resist, to fight, to never give herself away. Yet under the moonlight, beside the man who had caught her arrow and captured her heart, she felt a pull stronger than fear or pride. Cale lifted his hand, brushing a strand of hair from her face. His fingers lingered, warm against her skin, tracing the line of her cheek. Evangeline's breath caught in her throat. Then in one motion, both fierce and gentle, he drew her close. The kiss was soft at first, testing boundaries, a question asked in whispers and heat. Her heart responded before her mind could argue. And in that silver-lit desert, the Duchess, the proud, defiant woman, felt herself dissolve into something both terrifying and intoxicating. Love. They broke apart only to breathe, foreheads touching, shadows and moonlight wrapping them in a world apart from fear, conflict and expectation. Cale's voice was a soft promise. "You belong here if you choose, with me, under this moon." Evangeline's eyes shimmered. Pride warred with desire, yet the pull of the desert of him was undeniable. I will stay," she whispered, her voice trembling with truth. The desert listened. The wind stilled for a heartbeat, and in that moment, under the light of 1,000 stars and a moon that bore witness, the bond between them was sealed, fierce, fragile and eternal, and for the first time, Evangeline St. Clair felt the full weight of surrender, not to fear, not to circumstance, but to love itself. The desert night had been calm, almost serene, but dawn arrived like a gunshot. Evangeline St. Clair awoke to the low rumble of hooves and the metallic clatter of weapons. Mist hung over the canyon, but the sharp tang of fear was unmistakable. Soldiers, U.S. cavalry, were riding fast, their flags snapping in the wind, rifles leveled toward the village. Cale was already moving, silent and precise, his eyes scanning the ridge. "Stay close," he whispered, pressing her back against him as he drew his bow. The moment was sudden, violent, and yet there was a rhythm to his movements honed from years of desert survival. Evangeline's pulse raced. Her fingers went to the small pistol at her hip, then faltered. She was a duchess, a woman of privilege, not a warrior. Yet here, under the rising sun, she had no choice. "Evangeline," Cale said, voice steady but urgent. "You must fight or they will take the village and me." Fear collided with resolve. She nodded, lifting the pistol, her hands trembling. The soldiers descended like a tide, shouting, boots and horses stamping across the sand. Dust rose in clouds, the scent of gunpowder mixing with sage and sweat. Cale loosed an arrow, swift and precise. It struck a soldier's shoulder, dropping him before he could raise his rifle. Evangeline fired her pistol, the crack loud in the still morning, heart hammering. The bullets were small and few, but each one carried the weight of her defiance. She moved instinctively, dodging behind rocks, firing again and again, adrenaline sharpening every thought, every breath. Soldiers pressed forward, their ranks breaking against the villagers, who were armed with spears, knives, and fire-hardened courage. Cale guided them with quiet commands, positioning women and children behind safe cover, moving with the rhythm of battle he had known since boyhood. Suddenly, a rifle cracked nearby. Evangeline's world slowed. Cale threw himself over her just in time, a bullet striking his shoulder instead of her chest. Pain flared in her stomach, but she pushed it down, gripping his arm as he pulled her to the side of a large boulder. "You'll kill yourself," she cried, panic clawing her voice. Cale shook his head, gritting his teeth against the pain. "Not yet," he said, voice steady despite blood trickling down his side. We survived together. The battle raged on around them. Smoke and dust choked the air. Evangeline realized she was no longer merely a guest or a captive. She was a participant, a defender of a world she barely understood. She shot again, each arrow and pistol round finding its mark, each movement teaching her something about courage she had never known in her sheltered life. Hours seemed to stretch into a single, endless moment. When the sun rose high, the soldiers faltered. The Apache, with Cale at their center, held the village. The enemy retreated, leaving behind the chaos of broken wagons, abandoned rifles, and the echo of what could have been slaughter. Cale sank to one knee, panting, his hand pressed against the wound in his shoulder. Evangeline rushed to him, fingers trembling as she applied pressure, tears burning her eyes. "You could have died," she whispered. "And yet I did not," he said, grimacing but smiling faintly at her touch. "Not when you were here." Her heart tightened. This man, this warrior who had caught her arrow, carried her into his world and now saved her village, was more than danger or mystery. He was a force, a protector, and she realized the depth of what she felt. Evangeline sat beside him, pressing a rag to his wound, watching the desert reclaim its silence. The sun had risen, the battle was over, and yet the stakes had changed forever. She was no longer a duchess in a distant land. She was a woman bound to a warrior, to a tribe, and to a desert that demanded courage and love in equal measure. And for the first time, Evangeline St. Clair understood that love and war were often inseparable, and that her heart would never forgive her if she turned away now. The desert was quiet once more, but its silence carried a weight heavier than any gunfire or battle cry. Evangeline St. Clair sat beside Cale, his shoulder bandaged as best she could manage with cloth and rawhide. The Apache warriors moved through the village, tending to the wounded, reinforcing defenses, and reclaiming what little peace remained after the dawn's chaos. Evangeline's hands shook slightly, not from fatigue but from the realization that everything had changed. She looked at Cale, strong, fierce, and yet painfully human, and felt a strange mix of fear, awe, and longing. "You saved my life," she said softly, almost afraid to break the fragile silence. Cale shook his head. "We saved each other." His amber eyes held hers unwavering. "You fought beside us. You defended your place here even when it frightened you." She swallowed hard, remembering the taste of gunpowder, the heat of battle, the terror and exhilaration of defending a world she barely understood. "I don't belong here," she said, voice tight. "Not truly." Cale's hand found hers, calloused yet gentle. "Perhaps, but neither do you belong in the world you left. You have lived among fences and titles, but the desert doesn't follow rules." Evangeline stared down at their joined hands. She felt the truth in his words, a pull she could neither fight nor fully accept. She had been a duchess in a world of order and expectation, a woman trained to command respect from a distance. Yet here she had discovered something raw, fierce, and profoundly human. Freedom tempered with love. The Apache children watched her from the edges of the fire pits, curious and cautious. The women offered nods of acknowledgement, their eyes assessing her with quiet judgment. The men kept their distance, some respectful, some wary, all aware that a white woman had survived their world without fear. Evangeline realized that she was suspended between two realities, the world she had been born into, and the world she had fought, bled, and laughed to survive in over the past days. Each had its rules, its expectations, and its dangers. Each demanded a different version of her, yet neither could be fully abandoned. Cale's voice drew her back. "You are torn," he said softly, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "You want to be free, yet you fear freedom without the walls that once held you safe. You want love, yet fear its power." She met his gaze, the amber fire of his eyes holding her captive even without a word. "And you?" she asked. "Do you ever wish the world were simpler?" Cale shook his head. "Simplicity is a lie, but life is richer, fiercer and truer when you accept its wildness." The wind swept through the canyon, carrying the scent of smoke, sage, and the distant desert blooms. Evangeline felt it stir something within her, a longing for belonging she had never allowed herself to feel. She knew she could not return to the world of silk dresses and polite society, nor did she want to. The desert, with all its danger and beauty, had claimed her heart. She leaned against Kyle, the warmth of his body grounding her, the rhythm of his heartbeat steadying her own. Here, between two worlds, she felt a fragile kind of peace, the understanding that she could belong to both yet exist fully in neither. "You will have to choose one day," Kyle said, his voice a whisper only she could hear. "But for tonight, be here. Let the desert teach you what it means to be alive." Evangeline closed her eyes, letting the night and the man beside her enfold her. She had crossed a boundary she could never return from, and she did not wish to. The desert, Cale, and the tribe had woven her into a tapestry far richer and wilder than any life of comfort could offer. And for the first time, she understood that some choices were not about right or wrong, but about courage, heart, and the willingness to embrace the unknown. The moon rose high, casting its silver glow over the canyon. Evangeline St. Clair, the Duchess, the outsider, and now a woman bound to the desert and the warrior who had captured her arrow and her heart, let herself rest. For tonight she belonged nowhere and everywhere, and that was enough. The night was still, the desert holding its breath, stars scattered across the sky like shards of glass, and the moon cast a silver glow over the village. Evangeline St. Clair sat quietly by the riverbank, Cale beside her, the events of the past days replaying in her mind like a storm and a lullaby at once. She had been shot at, captured, fought alongside warriors, and survived. And somewhere in the chaos she had found something unexpected. Love, fierce and undeniable. Cale watched her, silent as the wind, his amber eyes reflecting the moonlight. "You have changed," he said softly. Evangeline lifted her gaze, meeting his. "And you?" she asked. "You have too. The man I met catching my arrow. He's not the same as the one who rides beside me now." He smiled faintly. "The desert changes all who endure it. And perhaps it has changed you more than you realize." For a long moment neither spoke. The only sounds were the soft trickle of the river and the whisper of the wind through the canyon. Evangeline felt the pulse of life in this world, wild, untamed, and utterly honest. She realized that she had shed her old self, the Duchess of distant lands, the woman defined by titles and expectations. Here in the heart of the desert she was reborn. Cale reached out, brushing a lock of hair from her face. His hand lingered against her cheek, warm and grounding. "You are mine in ways that go beyond arrows in battles," he whispered. "And I am yours," her chest tightened. The pride she had carried all her life battled with a new, dangerous truth. Yet she did not resist. She leaned into his touch, letting the vulnerability she had always hidden surface, mingling with the desire that had been growing since the day he caught her arrow. "I never imagined," she began, voice trembling, "that I could feel this way. That I could want this." Cale pressed his forehead to hers, a gentle, silent affirmation. "The desert has its own way of teaching hearts," he murmured. "It is fierce, unyielding, and sometimes merciful." Evangeline smiled faintly, letting the first tears of relief and joy streak her face. She had fought fear, defiance, and pride to get here, and now under the moonlight it was all worth it. He leaned closer, capturing her lips in a kiss both tender and consuming. The desert around them seemed to pause, as if the wind itself was holding still to witness this union. The kiss deepened, carrying with it a promise of protection, passion, and a bond forged in fire and tested by storms. When they parted, Cale held her close, his arms a shield against the chill of night. "Whatever comes," he said, voice low and steady. "The desert, the tribe, and I will stand with you. Always." Evangeline rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "And I with you," she whispered, the words simple yet profound. "No matter what world we are in, or what challenges come, I am yours." The moon rose higher, bathing them in silver light. For the first time, Evangeline felt complete. Not as a duchess, not as an outsider, but as a woman who had discovered her place in a world that was wild, beautiful, and full of danger. She had been tested, claimed, and changed, and she had chosen love. Cale tightened his hold, and she closed her eyes, surrendering fully to the desert, to him, and to the life that stretched before them. A life without walls, without fear, and full of possibility. Above them, the stars glimmered like the eyes of the ancestors, witnessing a vow made under moonlight, a vow of courage, passion, and unbreakable devotion. Evangeline St. Clair, once a duchess of distant lands, now a woman of the desert, had found her heart. And Cale, the warrior who had caught her arrow and claimed her soul, had kept it safe. Together, under the moon's watchful gaze, they stepped into a future forged in fire, shadow, and unyielding love. The desert whispered around them, carrying the story forward, and for the first time, Evangeline knew she was exactly where she was meant to be.